I would like to take you 3,000 miles southeast of here to Darfur in Sudan. The landscape is arid and sandy, almost desert. People travel around on camels. The roads are ill-defined and just cut across the countryside. It's a place which is both magical and forbidding, a climate which means that every few years, drought is inevitable and crops fail. Life is precarious. I started my professional life as a nutritionist working for Save the Children, and I was supporting teams of people in parts of the world where childhood malnutrition is normal and often life-threatening. In 2001, I met this woman in North Darfur. She had traveled more than a day on foot with her child. She'd traveled outside, she'd slept outside overnight. She was in desperate circumstances. Her child was malnourished. It was a last resort, and her child needed to eat. She faced three major problems. The first was an economic problem. She didn't have the financial resources to buy the food that her child needed. Her second problem was a climate problem. The rains had failed, and that had pushed up prices. So it meant that any financial power that she did have was just stripped away from her. And her third problem was a nutrition problem. It meant that any money that she did have, the food that was available to buy on the market, just wasn't nutritionally adequate to sustain her growing child. Her and her child were a hostage to the food system. That was 20 years ago, and ever since, I have been trying to find different ways to try and change the food system, a food system which traps us into eating food which is bad for our health and bad for our planet. And today, I'd like you to consider whether the food system is holding you hostage and what you can do about it. The industrialized food system emerged out of the Second World War at a time when famine and food shortage were a real threat. And the system has been geared to produce the greatest number of calories for the smallest cost. And it's been incredibly successful in doing that. We've seen amazing innovations in crop breeding for staple food production and in the use of chemicals to maximize yield. And we have a situation now where we can feed the world. But in fact, in doing so, we've now created a system where it's actually theoretically possible for there to be no famine. So we have a food system that can feed the world, but inadvertently, we've created another set of problems. And these problems are not so much about how we produce our food, the agricultural methods that we use, the processing and the transportation, but more importantly, and perhaps surprising to many of you, the problems originating from the types of food that we're producing and eating. So there are two main problems that I'm going to talk about. The first is the junk food cycle. So during 2020 and 2021, I was fortunate enough to be Chief Independent Advisor to the development of a food strategy for England, a national food strategy. This was an independent review that was commissioned by the government and led by Henry Dimbleby. This was a long way from the challenges of Darfur, but during the throes of doing that work, I learned a lot more about how we in the UK are held hostage by our food system. Now, we coined the phrase the junk food cycle to describe how we've come about how we now have a situation where highly processed foods, which are really packed full with calories, but often very low in nutrients, have started to take over all categories of food that we're eating, even things like yogurts or breakfast cereals or ready meals. These foods have become such a dominant part of our diet that they make up more than 50% of the calories that we consume. Yeah, you heard that right. These are junk foods which together make up half of what we eat. So the production of cheap ingredients, combined with our genetic predisposition to seeking out energy-dense foods, has together created a reinforcing feedback loop in the system. We want to eat these foods. They're not very good at satiating our appetite. They're often highly palatable. Companies have become very good at selling us these foods and finding all kinds of creative ways to get us excited about these foods. They sell more and we buy more. We're stuck in this cycle, and companies are stuck in this cycle too. This is the easiest way to make money and keep shareholders happy. So without real choice, we're hostages of this food system. You, me, all of us are stuck in this junk food cycle. The second problem is a problem of meat. Meat has become, in the countries like the UK and other rich countries, a central pillar of our diets. Now, there are two main problems with meat production. The first problem is a problem of methane. So ruminant animals emit methane, and methane is a greenhouse gas. In fact, it's a greenhouse gas which is 85 times more potent than carbon dioxide. The second problem with meat is that it takes up land. And this is land which we could be using for storing carbon or for regenerating nature. So take a look at this slide. You'll see on the left-hand side, this was 11,000 years ago. These bubbles are representing the mass of animals and people on our planet. So on the left-hand side, 11,000 years ago, you'll see that tiny little dot, which is humans and wild animals, a big circle. And now fast forward to the present day. On the right-hand side, you'll see human population has obviously grown considerably. Wild animals, perhaps not surprisingly, have gone down. But look at that huge mass of farmed animals in yellow. So we now have a situation where 3/4 of our agricultural land worldwide is used for livestock production. So that's either grazing animals or growing feed to feed animals. And of course, much of that food could be repurposed for human consumption. That would be a much more efficient way of eating. And of course, in countries like the UK, we in fact eat more protein than we need, so we don't actually need to be eating all of this meat. So we have a situation now where in total, our food makes up between 25% and 30% of all greenhouse gas emissions. And that means that it's contributing to rising temperatures and more extreme weather events. And that means that the rains are failing in East Africa. And that means that for the mother that I met in Darfur, the situation is even more precarious. But this food system isn't just wreaking havoc on our environment, it's also wreaking havoc on our health. So here in the UK, our diets are the biggest risk factor for preventable disease. And this is exacting a massive toll on our health. So starting in early years with children who get tooth decay and unhealthy weight gain, and these problems accumulate into later life with joint problems, conditions like type 2 diabetes with all the horrible side effects which go with that, heart disease, and a range of other conditions which are not only debilitating for us all, but also are placing a massive pressure on our straining NHS. But perhaps what's more chilling is the fact that behind this picture are a whole set of inequalities embedded within it. In fact, these tasty, calorific, often meaty foods, as we've said, are often relatively cheap. In fact, healthy calories are 3 times more expensive per calorie on average than unhealthy calories. So if you're on a low income, it's perhaps not surprising that you tend to eat less fruits and vegetables, less fiber, less oily fish, all foods which are vital for protecting your long-term health. So now in the UK, we have a staggering 18 years of difference between healthy life expectancy in the most affluent parts of the country and the least affluent parts of the country. And diet plays a massive part in this. And like the woman in Darfur, we also have a problem with agency, or lack of it. So in the UK, there are 10 companies that sell us 96% of the food that we eat. It's a race for market share. The fast food companies are under the same imperative. They promote more, we buy more. It's an addiction. The system is geared to sell us more and more of this food. And if we try to carve out a way of eating which is different from the mainstream, the odds are stacked against us. And so I want you to ask the question of yourselves, are you a food hostage? Do you have real choice, or do you just think that you do? When was the last time you saw fruit and veg on sale in a cinema or in a petrol station? When was the last time you saw a fast food chain that was only vegetarian? So what can we do about it? I'm going to suggest 3 things. The first thing, think, analyze, and organize. Be a food activist. You can campaign for your local council to stop the opening of yet another fast food takeaway. You could instead campaign to have a street market in place selling fresh fruits and vegetables. You could campaign for your university to put more meat-free options on the menu, or to make the vending healthier, or to put in place a better package for students that are facing economic hardship. Or you could campaign with organizations like mine, the Food Foundation, who are trying to get the government to introduce a set of policies that re-incentivize that system and make it easier for companies to sell us good food and harder for them to sell us bad food. Number 2. Eat more veg and eat less meat. So going back to the woman in Darfur, she had very, very little agency. You too may not have much money, not have much time, not have enough bandwidth to really break free of the shackles of this food system. But with every meal that you have puts a little bit of control in your hands. There is power in your plate. Use it. Really think about how you can use your consumer power as much as you have it to seek out the shops and restaurants that really are offering good food at affordable prices. Number 3, keep your eyes on the prize. When we eat together and we cook for one another, we show our love for one another. It helps us to build relationships across our families and our friends and our communities. A good food system really is underpinning a good society. Good food nourishes our children and helps them to reach their full potential. Food which is grown sustainably protects our soils and helps the regeneration of wildlife. A good food system can really unlock a better future for us and for our children. So, don't be a hostage to the food system. Be a food activist. Get out there and fight to be able to make conscious decisions about what you're eating. You never know, it might be the best change you make in your life. Thank you.